in politics. In recent weeks, reports have emerged of an alleged coup plot against the President Bola Ahmed Tinubu administration, with nearly 20 officers reportedly under investigation. It's a development that forced the cancellation, allegedly, of this year's Independence Day parade, and once again, it raises old, unsettling questions about democracy, governance, and the enduring allure of military rule. Between 1966 and 1999, Nigeria saw successive military takeovers, each one promising rescue, each one leaving scars on our democracy. So, why, in 2025, are some citizens still romanticizing military rule? Is democracy failing, or are we as a people failing democracy? To explore this conversation, I'm joined by two men who bring deep insight and lived experience. We're joined this evening by Lanre Arogundade, who is the Executive Director of the International Press Center and a veteran pro-democracy activist who fought in the June 12 struggle and lived through the Abacha years. Good evening to you, sir, and welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for making me part of this conversation.
Pleasure to have you join us. We're also joined by Professor Yusuf Ali Zwaka, who is a professor of political science at the University of Abuja and one of Nigeria's leading voices on governance. Good evening to you, sir. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me.
Right. Well, let's begin with you, Mr. Lanre. Now, you fought for democracy at a time when journalists were jailed, newspapers banned, and fear ruled the air pretty much. When you hear of a fresh coup plot today, what does this actually evoke for you on a personal note?
Yeah, please, can you take the question again?
Yeah, so I was asking when... Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
So I was saying that you actually fought for democracy at a time when journalists were jailed, newspapers were banned, and fear essentially ruled the air. When you hear of a fresh coup plot today, what does that evoke for you personally?
Well, I was kind of surprised because when you talk of the military, you're looking back to very, very dark days in the history of the country. You're looking at the various atrocities that went with military rule, some of which you already mentioned. The repression of the media, the violation of the rights of citizens, the fact that the military ruled, believing that they had the monopoly of knowledge, monopoly of the problems of the country, monopoly of the solutions, and nobody could dictate anything to them. And those who dared to paid heavy prices for that, not just journalists or media practitioners, but other individuals, civil rights advocates, who tried to call for transparency and accountability on the part of the military. And the list is very, very long. We're looking at those whose rights were violated without any explanation whatsoever. But at the same time, too, the news of the coup kind of gives one what you might call a worrisome reminder of what happened in the Second Republic, in the sense that the military handed over voluntarily, well, under pressure in 1979. We had an election and the civilian government was elected. And by 1983, they have spent 4 years and another election was elected with widespread allegations of rigging. In fact, the then ruling party, the National Party of Nigeria, boasted that it secured what is called a moonslide victory in that election. About at a time when people were highly dissatisfied, the economy was very bad. And so when the military suddenly struck again in December 1983, sections of the society spontaneously trooped out to celebrate and jubilate the fact that a civilian government, the supposed government of the people by the people, had actually been overthrown. So in getting this cool news, I think we need to begin to worry and look at these issues from different sides. The question of how the people are feeling, the question of their economic situation, and the need to pay closer attention to them. Otherwise, we might have a similar situation where people erroneously believe that the military perhaps will be better than the civilian government.
Well, let's come to Professor Zwaka. Looking at Nigeria's long and painful history with coups, from Aguiyi Ironsi to Sani Abacha and whatnot, why do you think the idea of military rule still hold appeal to some Nigerians, despite its arguably devastating legacy, really?
Thank you so much for that question. For me, why, for instance, you still hear, Nigerians still maybe thinking about such forms of government up to this moment, is because you don't really have a clear difference between what we call a democracy that we're practicing and the military rule. Because what actually is really wrong with the military rule is the fact that they deny people their rights, they rule arbitrarily without consulting the people, and there is virtually some kind of suspension of the constitution. Now, when you look at the democracy that we're practicing from 1999 to date, are the institutions of government really democratized? For instance, today you had a protest, for instance, in Abuja. Now, should the police continue to brutalize protesters? Is that the way to go in a democratic government? I think, when you are talking about democracy, it means that we should be able to, imbibe civil way of conducting ourselves. So we cannot be using force and then pretending that, we don't like military government. Because for me, the difference really, the difference between the two is that under a civilian government, people are supposed to govern because they have given their consent. And so if a government is legitimate, it has nothing to fear again of the people, because it is a government that was established by people. And therefore, there is nothing wrong to ensure that, all the institutions of government actually work towards upholding and promoting and safeguarding, constitutional rule.
It's interesting that you make this assertion, Professor, really, because one will wonder, you're essentially saying, unless I get you wrong, that we're not seeing any much difference between the military governments we've had in the past and the current civilian governments that we have at this point in time, really, because one will also argue, if that be the case, what then is the essence of the elections that we often undertake every now and then? Are you saying that the people's choice are not actually reflecting?
You see, even the elections that you want to talk about now, are they really elections that are free, fair, and credible? Is it the people's, at the end of the day, is it the people's wish that actually prevails, or it is the wish of the politicians? For instance, now you look at what is happening in the country. Is that the way to run a multi-party democracy, where everybody is running away from his party and joining the APC? Is that how to run a multi-party democracy? Is it in the interest of even the APC to continue to allow that to happen? even if they are not the one instigating it, will they allow such, things to prevail as in a multi-party democracy? I think there are a lot of questions that we need to really interrogate ourselves
Yeah,
about.
but Prof, in their own
People are talking
defense,
about
really,
electoral
if their
reforms.
enemy's
The
house
last
is
election, we're all aware of the fact that the presidential election, we are told that there was a glitch. Up to date, as we speak, nothing has been, explained about actually what transpired. And so you cannot continue. But the other elections, the senatorial and presidential election and the House of Rep election, which was done through the same, beavers, went on successfully. So you cannot blindfold people and think that you're going to continue to. So if we don't have free, fair, and credible elections, for instance, because when military are taking over, what are the causes? They are usually political, economic, social, and institutional problems. And so if we cannot even deepen our democracy to be able to have free, fair, and credible elections, then we have a problem right from the start of the democracy itself. Because for the past 20-something years I've been practicing democracy, 26. And with about 7 electoral cycles, we have yet to get a very good system that elections are not supposed to be ending up in the courts. They're supposed to be ending up at the polling unit. Once you finish election at the polling unit, the winner should be known. You don't need to go to any court for anything. So if we continue to go to court, are we really helping democracy? And there are a lot of things that are wrong, really.
All right. Well, let's return to Mr. Rogundade, though. I'm really curious. Many young Nigerians never actually witnessed, military rule and whatnot. And online, you can see some of them. Sometimes they describe it as a cleaner or more disciplined form of governance. What do you think fuels this nostalgia, and how do we actually go about correcting it, if you actually think that it needs to be corrected?
So every generation is inspired by what they see around them, and just like the person was trying to allude to, I think it must be understood first and foremost that, in a sense, what usually matters to the people may not sometimes be, the type of government, but what the government is actually doing. And so even in our generation, we had some of our activists who venerated, military leaders. I knew, for example, that there was a time when Jerry Rawlings was very, very popular among students. You also had Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso. Incidentally, you now have another Burkina Faso leader that seems to be capturing the imagination of the young people, because they see them taking some stand against imperialism, trying to use the resources of their country to develop. And we can't say everything that we see is actually true unless you really go on the ground, because we have also a whole lot of information manipulation going on today. But the reality of the ground is that for the younger generation, they look at what is happening in our environment, in the country here, they look at what others are doing, and they naturally gravitate towards them. So it's not peculiar to any generation, as such. And what's the point to stress, really, is that for those who rule, they must understand that democracy cannot be taken for granted. When life becomes very difficult for people, the economic hardship is so much and so on, they would embrace whatever they think is an alternative. But nobody's saying, I'm not saying that necessarily will be an alternative, because the truth of the matter is that no matter how attractive or fanciful military is, ultimately it's about dictatorship, it's about they ruling in a particular way, and the tendency on the long run will be for them to repress where they feel that there's an opposition to them. But the real problem, as the Prof was trying to emphasize, is that when people do not see any difference between what we considered as military in the past, in the context of the atrocities, and now, it will make no difference to them if whatever happens to that government. So you're talking of repression. We're looking at statistics, and we're saying that we're having many more journalists detained, arrested, and molested, even other civilian route down, even the military. So ordinarily, people then tell you that, so what are you saying? It takes those who are very cautious to warn and say, well, better for us to organize, to mobilize, and have, the change that we desire rather than going back, to the military rule. But we don't hold all the issues, and those governments should know better in terms of the way, they behave as if, everything must go their way, it's the end of the world, and things like that. That for me is the big question. So it's all about what is actually the difference, and I hope that those listening to us will understand that we're just trying to address these issues from different perspectives. If you like, you can draw the analogy of the animal farm, because animal farm was a political satire in that book, which I recommend to every young person to read. It's about the promise of a revolution, the promise of change, and then nothing happened, and then the rules were being manipulated along the way, where they said no animals shall sleep on bed. The new ruling class changed and said, what they said is that no animal shall sleep on bed with sheep. All those things went on, and towards the end of that book, the author pointedly said that because they used the imagery of the animal to present that political satire, and that you look from man to man to animal, and from animal to man, and you could not tell which one is which. It will be a real tragedy if, based on the way this democracy is being run, people will look from the military to the civilian government, and then from the civilians to the military government, and they will say they cannot tell which is which.
Yeah. You raised some really interesting points, and I'm going to come back to some of them a little bit later. But first, I'd like to talk to Professor Zoaka. Prof, some people actually argue that perhaps democracy, in the manner that we actually inherited it, doesn't quite fit Africa's realities, that we essentially need to develop a system, our own system of hybrid governance, sort of an Afro-democracy, such as... was proposed by former President Olusegun Obasanjo. Do you think this is a valid angle to pursue, or perhaps a dangerous distraction?
No, I don't think it's a dangerous distraction. I think the issue generally, if you look at it, is that you cannot borrow a system that didn't evolve from your own society and plant it in your own society and expect it to work the same way it has worked from where you borrowed it. I think that is practically the problem. I think Frederick made that point very clearly. And you see that after now, since we started practicing democracy, what we will have done maybe is domesticate it. And by domesticating it, it means that there are certain very negative aspects of democracy that we're trying to practice within our own society that is not working. For instance, in Africa, we don't have opposition ordinarily in our villages. There is nothing like opposition. And so therefore, when you now say you are an opposition party, you see, there is nowhere in Africa that opposition parties are being treated with kid gloves. Anywhere you find, they are being beaten up, arrested, killed, jailed, and all sorts of brutality is unleashed on them. And let me tell you, therefore, what it simply means is that we must be able to remove that oxygen of opposition and therefore find a way of practicing. I will tell you, for instance, we take the Chinese system, the Chinese model, what they call democratic cooperation. So instead of democratic opposition, all this opposition, you now have cooperation. That means that the political parties should be able to cooperate. Once there's a national agenda on how to develop the country, then every party should work towards achieving that agenda. And in that way, for instance, I have made a proposal, for instance, on how power should be shared. Particularly, you cannot say somebody should go and contest election. Then after the election, because you are using first past the post system, you say the person that has won is a winner, we take all system, and then all the other people that have contested have lost everything. Now, if you take the last election that happened, for instance, in Nigeria, Obi had 6 million votes. Atiku had 6 million votes. Kwankwaso had 1 million votes. Now, assuming, for instance, you say for each 1 million votes, we are going to give them 1 ministerial slot. Don't forget that the president will appoint 30-something ministers. That simply means that the opposition will just have about 13 ministers. And that will give them a sense of belonging to the system. And therefore, you won't have all this competition to kill each other. And you may begin to have a more, a more, conducive environment, largely for all the participants. And therefore, they will not be seeing the reason, for instance, why they should be leaving their party, or why, and so on. So you see, the issue is that unless we sit down, because these are some of the things we are not looking at. Well, as an independent country, we don't need to practice democracy the way it is practiced in America. We can look at some things within our own culture, within our own tradition and customs that can work with the democracy. And so one of the things that I know we don't have is opposition. There is no African society where you are going to be a thief, you are going to be a criminal, and they will allow you to live within that community. What they normally do is to ostracize you from the community. So you see, there is no way you can be holding a different view from members of the community. Yes.
Yeah, one of the things that immediately comes to my mind right now is, given the diversity of the nation Nigeria, cultures, religions, and whatnot, and values, as a matter of fact, one will actually come to think about it and say, look, if we're telling it to suit us, according to whose culture are we going to tailor it, really? Because this argument is something that really does come up every now and then. And so how do we surmount that challenge?
You see, the issue is very simple. When you are going to set up some standards for a country, as long as majority of people will agree that, look, really, should we continue to have opposition political parties, or should we now begin to think of democratic cooperation? Because that will help us to develop. And we have seen, for instance, China has virtually demonstrated that. You can see that China has virtually overtaken virtually everybody now. Why? Because they are using a system that is unique to them. And that has allowed them to develop. So we have to sit down and dialogue among us. What will allow us to make progress as a country? And then we adopt something that will help us. Not that we just keep doing things that are not helping us.
All right.
And then we say we cannot change it because we are in the better country.
Well, let's come back to Mr. Rogundadi now. I don't know what your thoughts are on this concept of Afro-democracy, democracy that actually works for Africans, that is tailored to suit Africans, right? And that also leads me to my next question. I'd like to hear your thought on that and this, my next question, right? Because when people actually say democracy isn't working, is the problem really the system itself, or the way we practice the system? Because there's an African saying that essentially goes thus, right? It's a bad workman that blames his tools. So should Nigeria perhaps consider maybe another model, maybe parliamentary, semi-presidential, maybe, a homegrown hybrid, for instance? What's your thoughts?
Well, I do not think that there is any system of governance or democracy that you might introduce now that would be necessarily new. It would have been practiced one way or the other in some parts of the world. But before I come to that, let me respond to this question of homegrown democracy. Let's have our own democracy. And just to say, because the first speaker was saying that in the traditional African society, we didn't have opposition. It may not necessarily be true. What we had in the traditional African society, citing as example, for example, the history of some of the empires in the southwestern part of Nigeria. Some of us are quite familiar with the Oyo Empire. We read books, we studied history, and a few other empires. What you could not take away from the African system, as shown in those empires, was the fact that it was also a system that relied on checks and balances. And so even though you had the king, the monarchy, who had absolute powers, who in some parts of Yoruba land are revered as second only to the gods. There are still, checks and balances in the way the society is structured. You had a group of chiefs that are empowered to call the king to order, where the king was getting arbitrary, and then those layers too had other layers. So there were checks and balances. Electing others, even when the oracles or cultures had been consulted, and they said it's this particular person, we still have to present that person to the town, to the entire people to see whether that was acceptable to them or not. If the people rejected, then the oracles had to be converted to produce another, candidate. So don't let us castigate our past as if, we're just there, we didn't have democracy, we didn't have a system, where some measure of accountability was brought to society. Now, coming to system of governance, I must say that for long, I have been of the opinion that the presidential system of government is too much like the military government, which we have spoken about in Nigeria. And if you look at the way our governance system is run, you could just see a replication of the military mentality, in the sense that, yes, we call it presidential, but this is a presidential that is more or less a direct fallout of military rule. The concept of Aso Rock itself is a military concept. Aso Rock is supposed to be a fortress because military lived with the fear of Coup, so they had to create, a massive, fortress to defend themselves. Under the military, the head of state or president, whatever they call themselves, and commander-in-chief would want to see his military officers, because that is a sign of loyalty. It's a sign that you are present and you are not planning a coup. So if the military president was traveling, was arriving, the service chiefs and all of them would go and line up. In a democracy, it's really abnormal to have service chiefs lining, waiting for a plane to land, being joined by governors, waving at the president, going or welcoming. I mean, they don't even govern. They just leave the governance issues and engage in all this. So it's a kind of a kick-shift system. And I felt, and I still feel that a parliamentary system of government would have been better. Why do I like the British system? I like the British system because it's not that their politicians are not irresponsible or corrupt, but there's an accountability mechanism that is built into the parliamentary system as practiced in Britain, in which case parties are elected based on, you win the prime ministership first if you even win your own constituency and if your party wins overall majority of seats. And then you have a party that forms the government and the other party automatically becomes the opposition, and the opposition is officially recognized. So when the prime minister speaks on the floor of the parliament, the next person that automatically speaks is the leader of opposition. He's the one asking questions. All the ministers are also elected. They are members of parliament. They are only seconded to handle some ministries, which in itself is even cost saving.
Yeah.
So in other words, you don't need a journalist to ask a minister of work what is the average cost of a road, because that question will have been asked in the parliament by the leader of opposition. So you see that in the presidential system, the media now becomes the opposition. Because where is the opposition, especially when the people are even abandoning their seats and joining the government and so on and so forth. So if you ask me the way forward, I would then say we need a kind of hybrid. I feel that where South Africa has fared better than us is because they have a hybrid. It's a mixture of presidential and parliamentary system. So at elections, you are elected into parliament based on your performance at the polls. It's not a winner takes all, because this system is such that if you win one vote, you take everything. And it creates an abnormality. It's also one of the things that drives people to want to join the ruling party. If they were not practicing that in South Africa, the Zuma probably would still remain in office. But no, there are so many parties there are many parties in the South African parliament, and then because it's a hybrid of parliamentary system, the executive, including the president, is a member of parliament. So the opposition right there were asking questions and they were raising issues, and there was clear for people to see. So I would feel that would be preferable than this winner takes all system and this presidential system that is just a kind of a caricature of a military system or military rule.
Right. On a final note now, because we are totally out of time, I'm going to return to Professor Alizwaka. I hope you'll be able to do this in as little time as possible, right? Now, if military government is really as bad, right, why does Africa and Nigeria too often tend to, return to democracy after every coup? What does this tell us about our collective political DNA? And then while you're at it as well, I'm hoping you can push in your final words as far way forward. This is really important too. Professor?
Sorry, I didn't get that thing you said. I didn't get you finally.
I was asking for way forward one on the one hand. On the other hand as well, right? Because some people argue that, look, military government is really bad, right? And whatnot. But most often than not, you find that Nigeria and Africa broadly always returns to democracy after every coup. So what does this actually tell us about our own political DNA? Is there something that is driving us in our DNA politically that, always makes us to fall back to this coup? And what's the way forward?
The problem generally, because of people don't understand these things, there is even an economic, some kind of per capita income that is required for you to even start thinking of practicing democracy. And Larry Diamond actually said that for you to even claim you are going to practice democracy, your per capita income should be hovering between $3,000 to about 5,000, 8,000 US dollars. And we are not even close to that. And so you can understand, economically, it's a system that we have adopted that we are not even, is not suitable for us to practice.
Curious as to why
but a lot of people also should understand
I'm
that.
sure I'm not the only one who is curious, Professor, if you could chip that in as well.
Yeah, so I think the problem will be that, are we really civil in our conduct and behavior? Because all of these things have to do with, the way we also, try to imbibe certain behavior, in our, right beginning from primary school as we grow up. So that we begin to understand that, look, there are things that we should be patient about, and we shouldn't be expecting, results. Because democracy is a very sluggish process. Because anything you want to do, it takes a very long time for you to achieve it. And so therefore, this impatience is because a lot of people have seen that after practicing democracy for 20-something years, we're not making, the kind of progress that we were really expecting to make. And so therefore, people are really discouraged about the entire thing and have lost faith, in the system.
Yeah, so what's the way forward? Quickly, if you can do this in 30 seconds.
So for me, I think the way forward will be for our, the elites, those who are in the political, system, have really to sit down and look at how they can build confidence of the people in the system. Because whatever we do, they are the ones actually that will take decisions. And if they continue to take the wrong decisions, continue to act wrongly, and continue to recruit stocks to do a certain thing, then we're not going to get anywhere. So the character aspect of our political leaders needs to be, they need to upgrade that to be something that is in tune with patriotism.
All right. Well, we need to leave
because if we are not patriotic, there's no way the country. Yeah, okay, no problem. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much,
have
Professor.
1 minute remaining.
We're out of time. Right, we've been speaking to Professor Yusuf Alizwaka, Professor of Political Science, and of course Lanre Arogundade, who's the Executive Director, International Press Center, and a pro-democracy activist. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen. All right, and thank you to you too as well for your time, for listening. We'll revert to the roundtable in a few moments after we take a listen to these messages. Stay here. on Radio Now 95.3 FM Lagos.
We are Radio Now 95.3 FM.